The only slight relief is that nobody's going to die if we if we don't get everything completely right. So, and this is actually, maybe I start with this. This is something you forget. If you're in the midst of animation, it gets very stressful. And the whole world seems to be, you know, your whole focus gets onto this. And something I really think you need to remind people, listen, it's just a cartoon. So calm down a bit, you know, it's not the end of the world, and nobody's going to die. So thanks for the introduction, Michael. So yeah, my talk is about production management in animation. Actually, is this my first slide? No, this is my first slide. Yes, production management in animation. So as a production manager, you may or may not be involved in the planning of a project, but you will be responsible for the execution of the plan. So to do this, the first thing you really need to know and understand is the pipeline for a project. It's essential for the planning, and even more so when you're running the project. So first I will go through a pipeline, and I will use the breadwinner as an example. I have a good few slides prepared to show all the different steps in the pipeline we had on the breadwinner. Then I'm going to talk a little about the schedule, and then lastly about the role of the production manager and some issues that you will most likely encounter when working on a production. So then, no, this is here. So the breadwinner. The breadwinner was a co-production between 3 studios. So we were Cartoon Saloon in Ireland, Aircraft Pictures in Canada, and Melusine Production in Luxembourg. It was directed by Nora Twomey, and we had a famous executive producer in Angelina Jolie, which gave us a bit of extra publicity and helped to promote the film. So that was really what it was about, to have her name attached, because you just get into papers easily if she does anything for you. So let's look at the pipeline from script to screen. Or, I mean, on the breadwinner, we actually had 2 pipelines. So we had 2 different styles. This is what we called the real world style. This is our normal pipeline, and this is the pipeline I'm going to go into in more depth. So we had 72 minutes in this style, and then we had another 21 minutes in this, what we call the storyboard style, which was done in a different software. So here, this is trying to copy paper cutout. So it was supposed to look as if it would be done in paper cutout, but actually it was all done digitally. But yeah, that's a different pipeline. I'm going to go and talk about the TV Paint pipeline, which we use on all our feature productions. So the one that I showed you before. So it always starts with a script. The script for Breadwinner was based on the original book by Deborah Ellis, and the screenplay was written by Anita Doron. So there should be a finished script before you start pre-production, but then there will be changes and rewrites and some things that, you know, dialogue changes. So it's not that the script that you start with will be the finished script. There are definitely going to be some changes to it. So while the writer's working on the script, your art directors, or art director, I mean, we had 2 on this project, but they will have to find the style of the project. So it's quite a process. So quite often and I will show you, I have a lot of slides prepared to show the evolution. So we had 2 art directors. Kieran Duffy was responsible for all the real world environments and for the compositing design, and Reza did all the character designs and the story world design. So Reza is originally from, Iran. So that was important for Nora. So we had someone who is familiar with the cultural aspect. So authenticity is always really important. On Song of the Sea and Secret of Kells, it was about Irish stories. So they feel much more confident that they knew the Irish aspect and the Celtic aspect, while Breadwinner is based in Afghanistan, Kabul. So that's obvious. And Nora couldn't even go there at the time. So yeah, it's always a bit more tricky. You don't want to put something on screen where then people get offended because you just get it wrong. So yes, I have a few slides here. So you see how at the start it's all very rough and sketchy. These are Reza's early sketches, very typical. You see the way he draws people with or without a neck. Oh, just change something here. Sorry, I need to see what's happening with my. Just gonna go back. So here I was, yeah. So I just do the sitting down because it's easier for me to. So yeah, at the start it's all about exploring. So there's a whole evolution in trying things and trying different medias. They did a lot of real painting with watercolor or other medias. So then we get into a bit closer to how in the end the locations look like. There's a market, shop. So yeah, that's all the exploration that is done at the start. The house interior, you see the progression from a very rough sketch here, and then it gets more defined, and this is in the end how it came out to be in the film. So then the color script is thumbnails that show the color palette of the different sequences as we move through the film. The more dramatic sequences will ask for more dramatic color. So it's good that when we start backgrounds that there's a whole arc for colors already decided. This is how we prepare then for the animation part. So the animators will need all these character design and model sheets to make sure that the big team, they all need to draw each character exactly the same. It all needs to look like it's made by one person, but it's a big team. So therefore, all needs to be defined really well. So character model sheets. So also I put this in the presentation. You see how Pavana changed from a rough Reza drawing to, at the right, you see this is from the final model sheet. So you see that some of the intention probably got a bit lost, but it would be just impossible to have, all these sketchy lines when you animate it. You really want to have not too much, we call it line mileage, because the more lines, the longer it takes to draw it. And so we had a 3D model to make sure that we get all the angles right, which is helpful because it was probably the most realistic project we did. So Song of the Sea would have been more stylized. This was very much about realism. So we wanted to make the characters always look real. This is Pavana's friend. So this would be a turnaround. And here you also see a note. So the director wouldn't want her to hold in one of these positions. So there's a note for the team that when she turns her head, they can use it as a transition pose, but never show her in this angle. If she's at 3/4, then show her from this angle. So this is all what gets into the preparation before the team actually starts. Now, that's a size relationship lineup. It's also really important that we have the characters in the right size compared to each other. So then while we do, this is also something that goes parallel. So while we do all the preparation for the location designs and the character designs, the storyboard team creates the storyboards, and then they get put into the animatic. And in storyboard, it's all about big picture, not pretty pictures, because these drawings, unless they come up in a talk like this, nobody will ever see them. And they will have to do probably a few passes. So when you do a storyboard, you do a first pass, and then you find things that might work, might not work so much. Then you might go into rewrite, as I said. So these need to be done quick, because it's a lot of work to even a 90 minutes animatic. If you start working too clean, then you'll never be finished. So it's really important that the storyboard artists really only sketch what's important to bring the story across, and you decide on your shots there. I actually don't know, am I connected to sound?
No, I don't think
No, that doesn't matter. So I can play this. There's a little clip here just to show. Oop.
Well, it may work.
It should be, yeah, it should be.
Well, no, the only thing is I don't even know how to, no. Well, sorry for that, but you're welcome. It's not playing. Well, it should be playing. Ah, yeah, okay. It doesn't matter, so I can just explain. So this is now an animatic, and you see, to save time, sometimes we even put only notes in there rather than redrawing it. So it's really important to get through these sequences really quick. And then when we are more certain, we can always draw the images nicer and cleaner, but because you just don't want to lose time on something that gets thrown away anyway and then has to be redrawn. So, yeah. So that was it. And you see how rough, how rough they work in this stage. Casting and voice recording. I don't have much noted down here, only that, so some directors like to bring in their cast in a group so the actors can play with, act with each other. So, but Nora would be a director, she much prefers to bring each actor into the booth and work with them individually, and then she's acting it out with them. But yeah, it's interesting how different directors have different preferences. Voice recording. So, and now we are at layout. So officially, layout is when we talk about production. So everything before was development, pre-production. Layout is the first step in production. And in layout, we define the stage for each scene and ensure continuity. So this is a camera pan. You have your start and end frame here, and you have Pavana there as a, stand-in. Here I have a storyboard panel at the top and then a layout. And you see, for storyboard, it wasn't important to show what's in the background because that really doesn't matter to tell the story. But then in layout, the layout artist needs to figure out what do we actually see in the background. So it shows a little bit the difference in focus. While the storyboard artist just focuses on the story, the layout artist focuses on the environment. So this is a layout. On the right there, you see how the layout is broken up in different levels. If you have camera movements, the levels will move. So you create this illusion of depth. We call it a multiplane. And basically, if something is closer to you and you walk around, it will move faster than anything that is further away. So that's why we need layers on different levels. And then when compositing does a camera movement, it creates this illusion of depth. And so each color here is a different layer. That is the background then when finished. And this is another example. So again, the layout, how it's split up into different layers, and then the finished background. So here you see a storyboard panel, a layout, and then the finished background. And again, layout and background. This is a good example to show that background artists really need to stick very closely to the layout. There's no changing things because the layout most likely goes to the animation team. They might draw some chickens that fit into those cages. If the BG artist decides, oh, I want it slightly over there, then it won't fit together at the end. So this is why all these stages in animation are really important, very clearly defined, and you can't change anything after it. So in layout, you really define what is where, and then in background, you just color it in. Just color it in, but yeah, that's the So layout and BG work with stills, right? It's like a painting, it's a PSD. Then all the other departments work with image sequences, so a scene that may be a few seconds long. So scene prep would be the first stage of that, and in scene prep, basically you take your layout, you bring it in, and then you make sure the file has the right length. And what you see here that might also be confusing. So this is Pavana, and this character will be in the front. And the background, we will just populate it with background characters. At this stage, we don't even know what necessarily is going to be there. So we just put a few stand-ins there to say, okay, this is the perspective, you know, just to show how it's mainly for perspective and maybe to indicate that there will be people there. So we used, on this stage, we had a whole, you know, Havana zombie army because it was just easier to just use one image as a stand-in for all the different background characters that will be later added. Yeah. So then posing, let me just see if this plays. Yeah, so posing is the next stage then after scene prep. So in posing, we bring the characters on model and we provide the key poses for animation. So you need only a small number of poses. As you see, this was 3 poses. So Pavana comes in, looks through the window, and then walks out again. And just a note, again, from a production point of view, the first thing I look at how many poses, because let's say your team struggles with reaching the targets. The first thing you ask, how many poses are you drawing? Maybe you draw too many poses, so just only what's necessary. And sometimes people get carried away a bit, so we even had projects where there were done too many poses and then animation complained that they didn't have enough to do themselves, or you know, they felt like they were doing their job. So yeah, it's important not to overdo. So rough animation, I'm going to play this. In rough animation, we define all the acting and the movement, and you see it's very rough. You don't draw all the frames. It's just what's needed to bring across the movement. Clean animation then, the characters on model, and each frame will be produced with clean lines. So this is now ready to be colored in, and these are the lines that you see on the final film. So this is basically the first stage, except for the backgrounds that I showed you earlier, where actually some of this will be on screen, just it will be colored in, but these lines are the final lines that you will see. Compositing might do a bit of a treatment, but still, so this is, yeah, this will be on screen. Effects animation, that's water, fire, you see he's turning the ladle there. Total animation, light and shadow on the characters to make them more three-dimensional. Then this is now done in ink and paint, so it's colored in. And lastly, this is the scene final comped. And you see there's our background characters now in there as well. They came from a different pipeline and a different department. And just to, funny enough, there is a mistake in this shot. And I'm pretty sure nobody here feels like there's something really wrong with it. But for, I don't know if you find anything, any thoughts? No. It's a good example. So for the artists, they might feel, oh my God, how could this happen? But in the end, it really doesn't matter because the audience really doesn't see it. If you look over there, this part should be the color of the vest. So it's really a small mistake that we obviously went through all the stages without noticing. So it's just here where this part should be colored this way. So, but I mean, and this is, I think, an animation where you really sometimes need a reality check, because for the artist, for the director, if they see this, it might be a big deal, because obviously all the effort went in there. But in the end, nobody's going to see it. So it's fine. We don't need to fix it. We don't need to go back into post. It's fine. And then after this, the last step is post-production with sound editing, sound design, music, color grading, deliverables. I don't have any slides. We also don't do them ourselves. So with post, you normally go into a fancy post-production house with a nice edit suite. And then it's also very quick compared to all the work that goes before that. And it's actually also something, because I worked in comp, so I'm very familiar with everything that leads up to comp. And then because post is after comp, and I never really got too much into it to understand in detail. Maybe one day I will, you know, go to and look over the shoulder of the people who are actually working there, but it's just, yeah, they do it, and they do it great. So here's an example, the difference between just how it's colored and comped. So there was a gradient put into it. So it's very slight, nuanced differences to integrate the characters better into the scene. This is that's a nuke scene, so it's quite complicated. Just showing it for how much goes into a relatively simple scene. And here, before I finish with the pipeline, the whole pipeline again, from storyboard, posing, rough animation, clean animation, to the final picture. Okay, so that was the pipeline. So every of these steps is its own department with maybe, I don't know, 5, 6 people on the team, maybe an animation, 10, 20, can be 30, a supervisor. So it's a lot of people that you need to make an animated feature film in 2D. The schedule. So that's obviously really important for a production manager because the schedule is what they have to make happen. So we have a schedule where we decide this can take X amount of weeks, and the production manager's task then is to make it happen. So to create a schedule, first of all, you have to work with assumptions because a schedule there's a few elements in the schedule. So when you plan, for example, for animation, you need to know how many minutes of animation you need to plan for. That's pretty straightforward on a feature. We know it's 90 minutes, but it could be 95, 85. You only know when you have your finished animatic, but obviously you do all the planning at the very start. But it's the most straightforward assumption. The next assumption is the number of scenes. Actually, do I have a slide for this? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So the next assumption is the number of scenes. We have a few departments that we measure in scenes, which is, for example, compositing and posing. So the number of scenes really depends a lot on the pace of the movie. If you have a slow-paced movie, you have long scenes, so you have less scenes. If you have a faster pace with more action scenes, then you will have more scenes. So it's actually so let's say you estimate for 1,000 scenes and then you're up with 1,200 scenes, you're probably going to be a little bit in trouble with your, getting it all done in time. So obviously always better to really estimate conservatively. It's great to find that you have less scenes. Try not to underestimate. And then layouts and backgrounds, even harder to estimate. So they depend firstly on how many scenes we have. And then they also depend on how often we go back into the same locations. If we go back to the same locations in the film over and over again, we will have more reuse. So we can reuse the same shots. So for example, on The Breadwinner, I assumed 600 layouts and BGs for the real world part. But it is a pretty slow-paced movie, so in the end, we only had to do 465 layouts and 555 BGs. The reason why there's more BGs than layouts is because you might go back to the same location in a different time of day. So you might have a day version, a night version, a morning version. So if you have different light situation, you need to paint the BG with different colors. And then the next thing is the weekly quotas for each department. So this is how many layouts in average can a layout artist do on this project? And that can be hard to predict. That's really hard to predict, actually. So the best is if you have a similar project that you've done and you can take it as comparison. You can say, okay, this is going to be around the same complexity. That's going to be harder. We have to make it easier. So yeah, quotas, and I come back to quotas. Quotas are a challenge to get them right. So then once you have all your assumed total numbers and your weekly quota, you can work out how many artists you need and for how many weeks you need them. So that's pure maths then, more or less. And that's reflected in the master schedule. So the master schedule would be like the size of the whole wall, even bigger. If I show it to you, it's, it would be so small that you can't see it. I have it a bit, so that's a bit smaller. So what you have here, you have your departments, you have your artists, and you have your weeks, and then you map out for each week. So this is what your quota is. So you see 5 layouts per week. And then down here you see what's your goal for this week. So this week you want to have 19 layouts approved. That's your cumulative. So by this week, you want to have a total of 54 layouts approved, and that would be 10% of all the layouts. So you stagger them in when a team starts. Don't expect them to be on full output from the start. So first of all, it's nice if you stagger in your team, but that depends a little bit how recruitment goes and when people can start and how, if we are, anyway. So that's now, these things can in the end still change. So it doesn't matter, you could maybe start 3 people here and 2 people then the next. But just when you plan it out, I like to plan it out ideally like this. And you see how the quota is 1 layout in the first week, 2 layouts the next week, 3, 4, and then you're at your 5 weeks, 5 layouts per week quota, and that's an average. So for the whole project, this is my summary schedule. So it takes about, I don't know if you can read it. So the first part is 12 months, that's script and concept art. Then you have another 12 months for the pre-production, for your storyboard, for your animatic, and for your asset designs, the character designs and location designs. Then we had about 19 months for all the production parts. So these are all the different departments. So there would be layout, BG, scene prep, all the steps that I showed you. And you see that because they all depend on the work from the previous department, that's why they always are staggered like this. It's about a month in between. So you have one department working for a month, and then you can give the material into the next department. And here's post. So post is relatively quick, so that's 5. And that includes also the deliverables. So depending on, is it going to go to the cinema? Is it going to a streamer? What kind of deliverables you need? That's then all happening in post. So yeah, 4 years. 4 years for 90 minutes. Okay, so the production manager, what does this person do? So I just put down a few. Obviously, there's a long list in the job description. You would probably have 20 lines or more, but just to concentrate on the most important ones. So when you have the master schedule, you need to translate it into detailed department schedule. So what you saw, I tell the production manager that we will need to have 19 layouts produced that week, but then he will have to work with the supervisor, maybe the coordinator, to plan it out for each artist. So assign the layouts and make sure that what gets done in the department matches what we need, these targets given by the master schedule. And then the next really important thing is communication. So the production manager needs to communicate the weekly goals clearly to the whole team, to the director and supervisors, needs to ensure that every artist knows their deadlines and is aware that they need to flag any problems and delays immediately. The production manager needs to monitor and report on weekly goals and intervene if these targets are not met. That can require some detective work. So it's not enough just to know, okay, we're not hitting our targets, and the question is, why are we not hitting the target? So that probably will require that you talk to a lot of people, you talk to the supervisor, you might talk to the artist, you need to find out why. Can be a lot of reasons, it could be either the bar is too high or we're doing things really complicated. Anyway, I talk a little bit more about this later actually. So the workflow also is something that the production manager needs to keep an eye on. Is the workflow actually working? Is there problems between departments? Do they have enough inventory? So if one department falls behind, normally it means the next department probably will be low on inventory. All the things the production manager needs to have an eye on it and troubleshoot if needed. And then the last thing I've put in here is that the production manager really needs to be able to handle stressful situations. And if anyone wants to go this way, I advise you start your meditation practice now because you will need it later. So what can possibly go wrong with such in those 4 years? And again, I just put down a few examples of things that I definitely encountered over the years. So finding the look, you know, it probably on one side is one of the most enjoyable parts for the people who are the art directors, because it's all creative and, you know, you have all these potential things, but also you have to make decisions, and that can be really hard for directors, because once you decide on something, you can't do everything else. So we had it in the past that it depends. Sometimes the art director might have a really clear vision about how it's supposed to look, but sometimes they don't. You know, maybe you get brought into a project that wasn't your project originally, and you have to find it. And it is really, it can be very difficult. It can be hard for directors and art directors to commit and make decisions. And also the schedule at this part is not so defined, because again, so for example, what we like to do on the stage is, like, we call it scene illustrations. It's like where we create an image, like a painted image that could be a final image from the film, yeah? And then how much do you need? You can have 10, you can have 20, you can have 100. So there in this phase, the amount of work is like, how long is a piece of string? How much do we need to do? So it gives you less of a clear definition of what do we actually need to do. We need to define the look. What does it mean? When is the look defined? So how many examples do we need? So that's why it's a bit harder also for production to measure. So are you 50% there to have defined the look? Are you 100? You know, so how do we measure? How close are you to having the look defined? So it can be, it's a bit vague sometimes. And then also, if you take too long to try things, try this, we still need to, once we have the look, we need to do all the model sheets that I showed you. So you might end up having not enough time to do then the detailed work in how does this, you know, all the turnarounds and stuff. So we had examples where we spent too much time on trying, and then when animation started, we didn't have the model sheets prepared. And then the animation team says, well, how does she look from behind? Or, you know, how does this character look? It's a lot of work. So it's important to keep an eye on that there's a focus there when it comes to art direction to start. So then finding the right supervisors. So good supervisors are so important. As a production manager, you need to work closely with each department supervisor. As you have seen, it's a complicated pipeline with a lot of departments, and it's impossible for one person to oversee all of it in detail. The supervisors are responsible for their departments, and they're also the best equipped people to help fixing a problem. So when it comes to this, what's the problem here? The best people who know is the ones who can paint the background, who can animate. So that's where, when there is, you know, supervisors are really like the extension of a production manager, basically, or should be. And then also in a supervisor, the most important skill is the ability to communicate and to keep their team happy and motivated. That's another thing. So they need to be kind of teachers, or if you have somebody who's good in teaching, I'm pretty sure he's going to be a good supervisor, because yeah, they have to brief and explain everything to their team, and they need to help people who are struggling. So I'd say it's really like a teacher. So if you maybe want to become a supervisor, I'm sure you. And then the last thing I have is you need to have a good balance between artistic ability, people skills, and generally a positive attitude. So I guess it's like what you look in a leader, and supervisors are the leader of their teams. Oh, I jumped ahead. Sorry. I might just go to this part then, which kind of, I wanted to leave it for last, but yeah, having a good mood and a good energy on the team is so important. I mean, it's like there's, and I think as a production manager, the team will know if you care about them, you know, if you feel you're part of them. What we don't have, and I think that's really what needs to be avoided, that the production manager feels like he's above everyone and he's better than everyone. So that's really something you probably don't want to, especially in animation where it's not a very corporate environment. So it really, a lot of it feels very like the big family. So we try to have a studio culture that is open, and communication in the studio is good, and to find ways to check in with the individual team members for a production manager. And again, the bigger the teams get, the harder. So this is then when we have coordinators that, again, are an extension of the production manager, and they need to do the daily check-in and making sure that people, if they have a problem, they speak about it. I might still go back now. Can I? Yeah. So, falling behind schedule, that's the big one. So I never worked on a production where there wasn't a real struggle to reach the targets mapped out in the master schedule. So it's so important to explain to the directors, supervisors, and the team that the quotas are based on the budget and the schedule. They represent what we can afford. Because on every project, people will say the quotas are too high. You're asking too much of me. I can't do 5 layouts. I can only do 3. And this is always the kind of the tug of war between how much asking we the artists to do. So this is where the directors are really important, that they buy in. And I mean, it's understandable. A director wants to create the best possible movie. It's like saying to a painter, okay, paint a picture, but don't paint it quite as good as you could. So that's basically what we're doing. We're always saying, okay, it can only be as good as we can afford. And that always goes, you know, you're always like between a rock and a hard place with this. So I think it's the eternal struggle of animation. So about the schedule and the output, I think it makes sense really to focus more on the department outputs than the individual outputs. I mean, you need to monitor the individual outputs of each artist as well. And if an artist underperforms, yes, there needs to be a performance plan put in place. But to be honest, even as a production manager, if my department hits their targets, I don't really care if there's someone who's faster and who's slower. So I leave that maybe to the supervisor and the coordinators. But the main thing is, does the department hit their targets? And also quite interesting, if everyone makes their quotas, but one artist doesn't, we kind of know the problem is with the artist. He probably needs more support. Maybe, you know, doesn't have the skills. If the whole team doesn't hit their targets, we know the problem isn't that, you know, then we're probably asking something that isn't possible. So then we either need to find a way to lower the bar a bit, or maybe we can find a way to work more time efficient. Maybe there's a way where you can do it quicker. So this is where the supervisor comes in to make this judgment. So why isn't the team reaching it? Why do you think, can this be done quicker? Where could we simplify? What can we do? It's also really important, mainly with the director, to agree on what's a priority and what is not so important. So as you saw, this example, not everything is the end of the world, even if there's mistakes. So, or another example is, so we had on Breadwinner, Nora was really, really clear that when it comes to clean up the faces needed to be perfect. That's where the audience is looking, you know, the mouth, the eyes, the face. This is where, if something is happening down there and a line is jiggling on the shoes, I mean, if people are looking on the shoes, something else went wrong already. So this is where, okay, what's important? What will the audience notice? And what is actually only somebody will notice who's, you know, looking at it 10 times and going through it frame by frame. Really important, because that's with animation being a bit of a perfectionism area, because you can control everything. It's not like live action where you need to take the best take. In animation theory, everything is under your control. It's important to get the director to buy in that, but we don't have the time to get everything perfect. Or another example is on Bee Gees. How long do we see this Bee Gee on the screen? Because the person who's painting the Bee Gee is looking at it for days. If it's on the screen for 2 seconds, the audience won't have time to read all the details. If there's a big close-up in front of the Bee Gee covering most of it, the audience won't see it. So really important to not get lost in the, you know, so this is, I think, where the production manager needs to come in a bit as a reality check and say, but how important is it actually? I know it's important to you because you're painting the Bee Gee and you want to paint the best Bee Gee ever all the time, but I'm sorry, if the audience won't notice it, we can't spend the money on this. We want to spend the money where we, you know, where it's important. We don't want to waste it on parts that won't really make a big difference to the film. So, and then my last, because I already covered this one, is working with other studios, which really, all I can say, it can either be a pleasure or a pain. So it's like with everything, if you start working with someone you don't know, it's always a big risk. So, and it depends on, yeah, and again, it's completely out of your control. So then all you can do is, if there's problems, is try to save the relationship, you know. Always better to go there in person. It's very easy to have this us and them mentality. We are doing everything right, they are doing everything wrong. You know, it's always easy to blame someone who's not in the room. So it's as much as you can to create a feeling we are all one team. Maybe bring a supervisor to work with us for a few weeks, so at least you have an established relationship with their supervisor, and the supervisor won't have this narrative that, oh yeah, they are just too picky. So the more personal connection you can have, I'd say the better, because it's much harder to be angry at someone who's sitting right next to you than to someone you see for 10 minutes on Skype, and you don't really see the human being behind it. Yeah, so that's it, because in the end, it's only a cartoon. So, do you have any questions? How are we doing for time? I switched off my phone. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I'll be the first. So I'm Mike in Mary Park. I'm a lecturer in computing, and I've just really a good talk. I found this very, very interesting. And I'm looking at this particularly from what kind of software you might be dealing with. I noticed you put up a great big, was that Excel for the schedule? Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else would you use? Do you use Excel just for scheduling? Would you use it to track your costs?
Yep.
And yeah, so maybe you could just speak a little bit about the software.
Yeah, so we're using good old Excel for the schedules and the budget, because I still think it's an amazing tool, and it's just so versatile. So yeah, schedules and budgets, all Excel. I mean, now Google has basically the same tools, but you know, like Google Spreadsheet, for me it's pretty much the same. Then we have a production software, which is called ShotGrid, used to be Shotgun. It's a database, right? So you find in the database, you have all your scenes, all your assets. You log the stages. So let's say a layout gets approved, we click approved, and then it goes to the next step. So the whole workflow is very, very heavily controlled, or easy to control through the production software. It's also great for reporting. It gives me, you know, it can spit out all the numbers, how many layouts do we have approved, that I can then compare to my master scheduler. That's ShotGrid. Then on the production side, it's a lot of software, and I probably will. So we have Toon Boom Storyboard Pro. That's what we use for storyboarding. Obviously, if you have an episodic show, you might use Toon Boom also for the animation part, which we don't. Then editing software. So we have Avid, and there's Premiere and a few other software. But our main software now that we're using is Avid. Then the backgrounds and layouts are done in Photoshop. Then the animation part is done in TV Paint. You saw in the story world style and also in the BG character, that's a rigging software called Moho. So that's a little bit like Toon Boom, just a different software. Then we have the compositing softwares, which could be Nuke or After Effects. So for example, I saw it was on your question, the render software. I know very little about it. So with the render farm and the render software, all I care about is that it's there and it works.
Deadline,
yeah, Deadline. But we have obviously a whole team. Basically, it's IT, and then we also have a Python development team who help us with scripts. But that's all very much on the technical side that I am not too much knowledgeable about it, right? So, yeah, but we have programmers on the team who will come in. And so what was the last thing? I think a lot of the times they just make, so for example, in the past, when I was a compositor, I had a scene done, and then I needed to set it to render, right? I needed to open a window. It's not much work. You open a window, you put in a name, you say where do you want to render, you make sure it has the right format, and then you click render. So this is the software team then would just give you a button in Shotgun. You just say render, and it does all these things automatically. So the whole, it's the whole data structure, you know, where each shot, it's very defined how each shot is called. So it's sequence, and then 3 digits, and then scene, and 3 digits, and so that's all very, how do you say, defined. And this is then where you can benefit from programming, because they can take all these things off you.
Right. Okay. So you're indexing each frame.
Yes.
In the movie.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
So this would be an image sequence. So yeah, you have these naming conventions, because it needs to be 100% clear how everything is called, because it's such a big database that if people start calling as they wish, nothing can be found. And also all these automated scripts won't work. So the way you name things, that gets defined at the very start, and you basically then just repeat the same naming convention on other projects. So once you understand the principle, so basically which sequence, which scene, then what is it? Is it animation? Then you probably have your versions there. Yeah.
Okay. Just one last question about that big. Would someone have created that at the start of the project, known, like you mentioned, that was a 4-year project, and created that spreadsheet for 4 years worth of work, broke down? Yep. So that would be one of the first things you would do.
Yeah.
Is create that.
Yeah.
Very large.
Yeah. That's exactly it.
Detailed project plan for the whole body of work.
Yeah, that's the master schedule. I need it for the budget. So obviously before we start a project, we need to know how much it's going to cost.
Right.
And this gives me the data to know how many people do I need, how many weeks do I need them. And quite often then, that's another kind of these, how things are linked. So let's say I make a budget, it comes out at 15 million. We know we're never going to be able to raise 15 million. We have to, maybe 13 million. I go back into the master schedule and raise the quotas. So that means I can probably take out one person, or we can do it in 9 months instead of 12 months. So this is where the master schedule is really important to really make sure that we can do it with this number of people in this number of weeks, and this is what it's going to cost.
That's great. I'm very interested in the shot grid side of it, because it's kind of central to a lot of the work that maybe I would do.
Yeah.
Shot grid. How do the two work together? Is shot grid your central focus when you go into work every day, or is it the spreadsheet and Excel, or is it a combination of both?
Well, I think, so for me personally, and I'm not a production manager anymore, I only look at shot grid once a week for my reports. And I get a report from the production manager, but I double check the numbers with shot grid, because I just don't trust anyone anymore. No, but it's still good. So shot grid, for me, it's just to confirm, yes, we have 700 layouts approved. And I can see this very easily in shot grid. For a production manager, I think it's much more day to day, yeah. Well, also, even as an artist, so each artist, they have a shot grid to-do page. So for all the team, it's not that they look at shot grid all day, but first of all, they have their to-do list in there, which is great. They can see, so for example, they click on a scene and they see, and shot grid gives them all the model sheets. So when someone from the production team will have to go through all the scenes and link all the model sheets for the characters that are in the scene to the scene, and then the artist just needs to click. So they will, with one click, they can see all the model sheets. They can also see what are all the other scenes where Pavana is wearing the headscarf. So it's a really great database, and once you get your head around it, it's quite intuitive, I think, about going around. You see the whole sequence. So let's say you have a sequence, and then you see all the scenes, and you see the latest little, thumbnail clip in it, and then you see all the statuses.
They stay connected, and you're communicating with all of them, and you're
Yeah.
giving them feedback
Yeah.
through
Yeah,
shop
but
grid.
again, you need someone from computer science to set it up.
Yes.
So I can use ShotGrid, I couldn't set it up. So I need someone to, and again, for example, I go to my programmer and I say, I want a report that shows me this, that, and that. And then they have to program it so I get these numbers pulled out of the database. But I couldn't do it myself.
I think that's an important point from our point of view as well, is the importance of ShotGrid that we teach our students, and their computer science skill, I suppose, coming from a sort of computer science department, that's heavily emphasised as part of the things we do, and it probably shows itself in other areas as well, like Deadline, for example. We're heavily involved with Deadline and the rendering software and networking and sort of idea of the render farm as well, so our students kind of experience that as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a computer science person.
Yeah.
I suppose.
But also our team in this regard grew. So it used to be just one. And now how many do we have? 3? 4. So there you also see how the needs have increased, like more projects, more things that can go wrong. Because I think for this department, they have kind of 2 main areas of work. They have okay, let's set something up, let's write a script, here's a request from the artist. They don't want to do 3 clicks here, they would only want to do 1 click. How do we do this? So that's one part. And then there's the troubleshooting where, deadline doesn't work, or whatever it is. So they have, like IT a little bit, these kind of two streams of work coming of this. One is, okay, you have 2 weeks to figure this out, and the other is, okay, this is not working and we need it fixed now. So there is a bit of a panic element also sometimes, I think, for them. This is why we had to increase the team, because we said, okay, we need someone who's available to deal with all the urgent requests because they can't wait. People are sitting there not being able to work. It's very expensive. And then we also need someone who can put their head down in something not being disrupted for 2 weeks and write a script. So, yeah.
Well, I'll have another question. I don't mean to hold the floor here or anything, but I just wonder if the people who work on this type of project, could you estimate how many is a percentage of this done remotely? Like, I imagine that you would have animators not on the same building, just doing.
Now we do, yeah. So thanks to COVID.
Yeah.
Before COVID, we had everyone in the building. It was like everyone had to be there. You have different partner studios who might be somewhere else, but they had all their people in the building. And then COVID came, and I have to say we were actually really lucky, and it worked surprisingly well, so I remember we were just about finishing Wolf Walkers. We had comp still, having to finish, and then we had to put people remote, and I said, we can't do comp remote, and then we could, because we had to. So that's actually, but then what you might do is you might have people remoting into a computer in the studio. So there's different way of people working from home. Some have their file with them at home, and then they just send it and upload it. Other people, they have to remote into a computer that's in the studio because they're dealing with so much data, you couldn't upload and download it, so that's the difference. But yeah, it works pretty well, and so we had the whole team at home, and yeah, surprisingly, it worked.
So I wondered, would you have any security concerns around that, like because of the nature of the work? I mean, have you had issues with that, or can you talk a little bit about that?
We didn't have any issues, thankfully, but it is a concern. I mean, there's this other whole aspect about it. To be honest, in the past, when we were a small independent studio, all we wanted was people to know about us, right? So, for example, our director, he would constantly put up stuff on social media, and I mean, there wasn't a security concern because kind of nobody knew who we were and what we were doing. And now we are working with companies like Netflix and Apple and Disney, and they have a whole other spiel about it where, everything is top secret. It's like working for, NASA. So, and it's actually quite, sometimes you really go, well, it's just a cartoon. I mean, what if people steal? But that's, on the other hand, I know about a company, actually, who I think they were hacked. and they lost all their server. So it is a concern if you're more thinking about being hacked. Again, I would hope nobody has the crazy idea of hacking us, but it happened to another company. I think this is the concern, really. Yeah, but yes, so basically what we need to do then, we need to have all the crews signing. First, they all need to sign an NDA.
Yes.
They basically repeatedly told that they can't share any of their work. It doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the company. We're going to be in real trouble if, you know. So there have been leaks in another studio and then all hell breaks loose. But thankfully, we didn't have any hours there. But it is a concern. Also, when you work for those companies, you have a whole list of things that you need to make sure people don't work with their monitors facing a window, or nobody else can be in the room, and so it's there, yeah. And then normally what you do, just between us, you make them, you know, sign the thing, and then I don't want to hear about it.
And the last question I'll ask then is, well, you mentioned that you're now working with other, like with Netflix and with Apple. Would they have their own kind of systems for rendering images? They don't impose any technologies on you?
They might have their file sharing that they want us to use. So for example, if we are delivering something to them, they want it uploaded to their platform, to their file sharing platform. But they are not necessarily interested in if we use Deadline or something else internally. So they're normally only concerned about when we are giving stuff to them, that it fits into their system, because obviously they have a lot of studios delivering to them. They want it all in the one centralized place, yeah. Yeah.
We have a number of students from the creative computing course who do, for their fourth year project, who take on, animation projects. And it can be quite difficult because, you know, as you know, they're dealing with other modules and deadlines and all that they have to reach as well. And in the first semester then, it's usually analysis and design, and then they go on to implementation, although they are, you know, going to do the production pipeline. And I suppose at the end of the day, if they come up maybe with 3 minutes or something of something good, well then that's good. But what advice could you give us as supervisors, supervising those students? And maybe it's a tall order to ask you because that has a lot of scope in it. Yeah, I suppose what advice could you give us, or if you were that student taking on that, you know?
Well, again, I think it depends a little bit what you're aiming to do. You know, do you want to work more in, let's say, a Boulder and a Brownberg studio in Dublin? Then you probably would try to use the software that they are using. Is it more, so for example, I think what we are looking for in students is, it depends again which area you're in. So something that we actually see a lot is just when young people who are amazingly talented. So, and I think this is then when somebody has a strong personal style and they might do their own little project. If this style resonates with one of our company directors, you know, they probably have a pretty good shot at it. But that is, it's like, in a way, okay, you know, like, have a good portfolio, and then I think a lot of it is luck also. So maybe what I would advise to a student as well, give it your best shot. You know, try if you know, where's your talent really? I think that's the question. If you have great design sensibility, show that. You know, if that's not your strength, if it's animation, you know, I guess in your student films you have. They build little groups, right, where they build a team and they work together?
No, they're single.
Oh, wow. So they are doing their own. Okay, so then you probably want to create your project about your strength, right? So let's say if your strength is design, you probably get away with very limited animation. If your strength is animation, then maybe just, I don't even know, maybe even try to emulate something that you've seen, but just show that you're really good at it. Because in fact, an animator, all they need to do is have the movement and the acting down. You know, they are given those model sheets. So as an animator, you have no need to have the ability to design a character, right? Because you never get to do it. You need to follow other designs. So I'd say really is if you find what you are good at and try to make your project around that, you know, and if it's painting and not animation, have very little animation but great backgrounds, because then you know, so I think that's probably the...
Follow up on that too. It's a good question, because based on what we're planning on doing from September on production management, is it more advisable to organise group projects rather than individual projects and get the problems then that you deal with different people?
I think it probably is a good idea, and I know that some of the other animation colleges would do it, and even to a degree where maybe then you find out who's actually the one who's production managing it, you know, maybe that's your talent, or maybe that's what you're drawn to, because I have people that I know who studied animation, went through all the, you know, the animation bit, but then realized I'm actually much better in organizing this, and it's great for them to understand it, so it's not a waste of time for them at all to have studied it, because that's exactly it. That's sometimes as a production manager you struggle. If you don't understand it inside out, it's hard to know, okay, but what's wrong here, or, you know, it's hard to call if somebody's bullshitting you a bit or not quite on the ball. So I think a group, and initially, and also because it's such a group effort, you know, also people have to learn how to work in a group, because animation definitely isn't a one-man thing. Yeah.
Because I think what happens with the fourth-year projects is we have people kind of doing the whole pipeline, and it can be very overwhelming, because at the end they don't feel as if they've created much.
Yeah.
But yet they've been busy all the time.
Yeah, because I think that's the nature of animation. It's immensely work intensive. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but so for example, when I mention it to people who don't work in animation, if our 2D animators, right, they do 8 seconds a week. Our 2D clean artists, they do 5 seconds a week. So you work a week for 5 seconds. It's a very slow, you need a lot of patience if you know, are in one of these departments who are like really, really slow. So that's why the whole pipeline comes from, and the whole division of work, and also, I mean, even the pipeline, all it is to make sure also that when you have to go back, you only go back a small step. So for example, I didn't explain it, but I think it's pretty clear. We don't just paint the backgrounds, and then the director says, but I want the chair over there, and then we have to repaint it. That's why we do the layouts first, and make sure the chair's in the right spot, and then we paint it. Animation is all about limiting. If you have to redo it, just do it in the small steps, so you don't have to go back a huge step. I don't know, that's not really that much, but that's, I think, where the whole, that's why you need so many people and so many specialists, and they all focus on their little thing. But it is great if people have various skills. I have to say that's also, it's really good if people understand a lot of what's going on in other departments. So in a way, I think it's good if a student learns all the departments, but then it might be helpful for them if they ask themselves the question, but where's my talent? And then they get a chance to shine there and show what they can do there.
Oh, that's great. Thanks very much for that.
Good. I think it's an important one, and it's maybe time maybe to maybe shut down, maybe get things finished. But I show you my last slide. Just sorry. Yeah.
That was my last. If nothing else works, bring cake.
Very good.